It's 3 a.m. The flame of the lantern on my desk is flickering, mirroring the tremors in my hands. This is my last night in this room. Starting tomorrow, I won't be Elena anymore. I will be service number 7492. I've spent 22 years of my life surrounded by these books and formulas. People think science is just a game of the mind, but I know that when you look at a virus under a microscope, you realize the fragility of life. I remember when I was 8, I tried to save a wounded bird. That was the first time I understood how silent death is. Today, as I stare at this military letter, I feel that same silence closing in on me. My mother baked a cake for me, but I couldn't take a single bite. Her eyes held that fear only a mother has when she sends her child into an unknown darkness. Papa was silent, as he always is. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Elena, remember, you aren't just a scientist there. You are the hope for the boys who will be counting their final breaths on the battlefield." I've packed my bag. Fewer clothes, more journals, and laboratory notes. I have to report to a classified base near Washington. What awaits me there? I don't know. I've heard that even sunlight needs permission to enter those gates. The Jeep door swung open, and the dust of Virginia stung my eyes. Before me stood a massive iron gate with a sign that read, "Property of the U.S. government. No trespassing." On the air here had a metallic tang like the smell of overheated iron. There were 4 others with me, all silent. Perhaps they, too, had left behind entire lifetimes. A major, whose face was as rigid as a stone statue, stepped toward us. His uniform was unnervingly crisp. He called out my name. "Dr. Vance?" I answered with a trembling voice. "Yes, sir." He scanned me from head to toe and said coldly, "You aren't a doctor here. You are a component in a weapon-building machine. Leave your emotions at the gate." I was led to a small room, just a cot, a desk, and a dim light. The walls were so thick that no sound from the outside world could penetrate. Sitting there, it dawned on me. I was now both a prisoner and a protector. That night, as I opened my journal, I felt as if someone was standing right behind me. It was a psychological dread birthed by the absolute silence of this place. The next day, we were taken to the lab. What I saw there made my soul shiver. In large glass vats were things I had never encountered even in medical textbooks. A chemical code named Project Nightfall was to be my responsibility. The major explained that this chemical didn't kill the enemy. It trapped them within their own nightmares until they lost their minds. Was I ready for this? Was a scientist's job to take lives or to save them? Laboratory number 4 was a place where time simply ceased to exist. There were no windows, no passage for sunlight, only blue fluorescent lights that gave everyone a deathly sallow complexion. On the desk before me lay a file stamped in stark red, "Top secret." My first task was to deconstruct the molecular structure of a chemical designed to trigger the human amygdala, the brain's fear center. When I peered through the microscope at those molecules, they looked like tiny soldiers, capable of destroying a man from within without firing a single bullet. My fingers would tremble as I mixed the compounds. A single spilled drop, and I might never walk out of that lab alive. Then came the evening that stripped away my peace. The major led me to an underground cell. Behind a reinforced glass pane sat a prisoner. He wasn't an enemy. He was a volunteer soldier on whom we were to test a diluted dose of Nightfall. As the gas hissed into the chamber, his eyes dilated. He wasn't screaming, but the sheer horror etched on his face was louder than any shriek. He began clawing at his own skin as if he felt thousands of insects crawling beneath it. I turned to the major, tears blurring my vision. "Sir, this is torture, not science," I whispered. Without looking back, he replied in a voice as cold as ice. "Doctor, if we don't do this, the Soviets will. And when they do, they will release this in our cities. Do you want your mother to die terrified of her own dreams?" That night, I wrote only one sentence in my journal. Today, I buried a piece of my soul under those blue lights. I finally understood why they called this Shadow Base. We weren't here to find the light. We were here to master the darkness. June 1965. The longest flight of my life. When the cargo doors hissed open, I wasn't met by the cool breeze of Virginia, but by a wall of heat and humidity so thick it felt like stepping into an oven. This was Vietnam. The air tasted of rotting wood, gunpowder, and stale sweat, a scent that clung to the back of your throat. I gripped my medical bag. Around me stood young soldiers, barely 19 or 20. Their faces didn't hold the patriotic fire seen in newspapers. Instead, their eyes were hollow, as if they already knew they weren't going home. I wasn't there as Dr. Vance, the healer. I was there as the overseer of Project Nightfall. My mission? To monitor the deployment of experimental chemicals in the field. We were transported to a remote outpost called Camp Black Hawk. At night, the jungle came alive with unnatural sounds, creatures I had never heard, punctuated by the distant, rhythmic chatter of machine gun fire. I sat alone in my tent, huddled behind a mosquito net. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to protest that I didn't belong here. I was a scientist. What was I doing in this green hell? The tent flap lurched open and they hauled in a wounded soldier. Sergeant Miller. His arm was shredded, soaked in blood, but it was his eyes that haunted me. They mirrored the prisoner back at the base, wide, panicked, seeing things that weren't there. He was delirious, muttering, "They're in the trees. They're just shadows, watching us." As I administered a sedative, my hands shook. I realized that the fear I had cultivated in the lab was already thriving here in the jungle shadows. My chemicals were only going to pour gasoline on this fire. It was 2 a.m. The silence of the jungle was so profound that even the sound of my own breathing felt like a crime. Suddenly, a thunderous explosion rocked the earth. Sirens wailed, and chaos erupted across Camp Black Hawk. The Viet Cong had launched a surprise assault. The major burst into my tent, his face masked in soot and his eyes ablaze with frantic intensity. He shoved a metallic briefcase into my hands. "Doctor, the time has come. The order to deploy Nightfall has been authorized. Move to the north sector." My feet felt like lead. "Sir, we haven't fully mapped the long-term human psychological effects," I screamed. He ignored me, dragging me toward the command bunker. As we activated the canisters, a faint violet mist spiraled into the night air. It was silent. It was odorless. Minutes later, the rhythmic crackle of enemy gunfire ceased. But the sounds that replaced them were far more haunting than any bullet. Screams. Not of physical pain, but of pure, unadulterated mental agony. The enemy soldiers, who moments ago were fierce attackers, were now slaughtering each other in the dark, perceiving their comrades as demonic entities. I peered through the binoculars. A young soldier, perhaps no older than myself, was recoiling from his own rifle as if it were a venomous serpent. He clutched his ears, howling, "Make them stop, stop the shadows." In that moment, the realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't built a defensive shield. I had unlatched the gates of hell. I sank onto the dirt floor of the bunker and scratched a single entry into my journal. Today, I didn't just defeat an enemy. I annihilated the last shred of the idea that war has rules. I am a killer whose hands are stained not with blood but with chemicals. Sleep became a stranger to me after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that violet mist and heard those harrowing screams. 3 days later, I discovered that the nightfall cloud had drifted toward a nearby village called Balong due to shifting winds. The major declared it a red zone and strictly forbade anyone from entering. But my conscience was a relentless interrogator. At 2 a.m., I grabbed my medical bag, stole a few experimental antidotes, and slipped through the rear fence of the camp. The jungle thorns tore at my skin, but I felt nothing. When I reached the village, the silence was sepulchral. There were no soldiers, only shattered huts and a lingering mist crawling across the ground. Whimpering sounds led me inside a small shack. An elderly woman sat there, clutching her grandson. The child wasn't physically wounded, but his eyes were wide, fixed on the empty air, his body racking with tremors. He was seeing shadows. My chemical had imprisoned this innocent mind in a perpetual hell. I tried to administer the antidote, but my strength failed me. What had I done? I wanted to build a shield to protect life, but I had forged a blade that severed the soul. Suddenly, the rumble of jeeps echoed from the distance. The military knew I was gone. I pressed the medicine into the woman's hands and fled into the dark, but I was leaving behind a reality I could never unsee. I wrote in my journal, "When science is untethered from morality, it becomes pure destruction. The demon I've unleashed cannot be put back in the bottle, but I will spend my remaining breath trying to stop it." Returning to camp, I wasn't immediately arrested, which was far more terrifying. The Major's silence was the precursor to a storm. The next morning, when I checked my lab reports, my blood ran cold. Every word I had written about the lethal effects of nightfall and the horrific consequences for civilians had been erased. In their place, a new report declared the project a resounding success and perfectly safe. I realized then that I wasn't just a scientist. I was a pawn used to lend legitimacy to a dark agenda. I decided that the truth had to be exposed. That night, I risked the one thing that carried a death sentence. I broke into the command center's archives. The air inside was stagnant and cold. My hands shook as I fumbled through the folders. Suddenly, my eyes locked onto a gray file labeled Project Nightfall Phase 2. And as I opened it, the world seemed to tilt. It wasn't just about tactical strikes. It contained maps of American cities where the gas was to be tested on our own populace under the guise of civil defense drills. A voice cut through the dark. "Dr. Vance, I told you to leave your emotions at the gate." I spun around. The Major stood there, pistol drawn, his face a mask of icy indifference. "You've made a fatal mistake, Elena. You've seen what was never meant for your eyes." In that split second, I understood my war wasn't with a foreign enemy, but with the very system I had sworn to serve. The crack of a gunshot echoed, the bullet grazing my ear. I leaped into the darkness of the jungle, knowing that from this moment on I was no longer a soldier. I was a fugitive. The snap of dry twigs beneath my feet sounded like explosions in the oppressive silence. Somewhere behind me, the baying of hounds and the rhythmic thrumming of helicopter blades echoed through the canopy. The Major had unleashed his hunters. I felt for the documents tucked inside my coat. They were now more precious than my own life. Blood seeped from my shoulder where the bullet had grazed me. Waves of throbbing pain radiated through my body, but I couldn't stop. Suddenly, my foot caught in a hidden swamp, and I tumbled down a steep embankment. Darkness rushed in, and for a moment I thought my story had reached its final page. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a crude cave. A small fire crackled, and beside it sat a figure in black silk, a Viet Cong soldier. My instinct was pure terror. I reached for the small scalpel I had stolen from the lab, but he raised a hand and spoke in a low, calm voice. He didn't want to kill me. He applied a poultice of crushed herbs to my wound, bringing a strange, numbing coolness. He was the enemy, the very person I had designed Nightfall to destroy. Yet in that cave, we were just two humans fleeing the same shadow. He offered me a small bowl of boiled rice and said in broken syllables, "War eats everyone." That night, I scribbled in my journal, "The one I came to kill is the one who saved me." Are these the people we were sent to experiment on? If my own people betrayed me and my enemy sheltered me, then where does the truth lie? I realized then that to stop Nightfall, I would have to help the very people I was sent to destroy. The roar of explosions tore the night asunder. Flames from the lab painted the sky in violent shades of orange. Nguyen and I were cutting through clouds of thick, acrid smoke, making our break for the perimeter. But then, a guttural groan from behind. I stopped and looked back. The Major was pinned under a fallen heavy filing cabinet, the fire hungrily crawling toward him. The man who had tried to kill me, who had authorized experiments on the innocent, was now utterly helpless, staring death in the face. Nguyen tugged at my arm. "We have to go, Elena. This place is going to level any second." My logic screamed at me to leave him, to let the fire judge him for his sins. But my soul, the doctor, Elena, who had entered this field to save lives, could not stay silent. I broke free from Nguyen and ran toward the flames. "What are you doing?" he shouted, but I didn't listen. I strained against the metal cabinet with every ounce of my strength. My fingers were blistering, the smoke choking my lungs, but finally the weight shifted and the Major's leg was free. I dragged him out, propping him up. When he opened his eyes and looked at me, the hatred was gone, replaced by a haunting bewilderment. He couldn't comprehend why the woman he had hunted had pulled him back from the abyss. We left him at a safe distance and vanished into the depths of the jungle. That night, once we were far enough away, I wrote on the final page of my journal, "Today, I didn't just save an enemy's life. I saved the human within me that this war tried to kill. Nightfall is gone, but my true war has only just begun. Now, I must find the nameless faces my science has scarred. Perhaps only then can I learn to forgive myself."